Bye.
Let's turn that off if you don't mind for now.
Hmm?
We're going to turn the recording off right now if you don't mind until we really get going. We will not, there we go. There's the button, the blue got it. So here we go. And I think, Anastasia, we can switch to the presentation right now.
Okay.
Oops, we could tell what we were working on. We're double checking our video for you.
Just give us 1 second. It never fails that you will have some sort of snafu here.
There we go. All right, so we're here tonight. This is an ECAC webinar about our steps to success, effective IEPs. So grateful to our sponsor, who you see here is the Chapel Hill Carborough City Schools Special Needs Advisory Council. It was their idea to do this. They helped guide the content. We are looking to do, based on some of their feedback, a little bit deeper dive into specific areas of the IEP. So if you are with a school district here tonight that does not have a Special Needs Advisory Council and you'd like to learn more about that, please use chat to ask some of our members of our host group about that. It's a great asset to a school district when those organizations can happen. So they sponsored us. We are ECAC. We are a lot of things. We are an organization that was founded by parents for primarily parents, along with the educators and other professionals supporting parents and their children. We are North Carolina's Parent Training and Information Center, providing education and support. We are not a legal services agency, just so you know. Next slide, please. We have a lot of programs. We have a lot of things we do, all under this umbrella of North Carolina's Parent Training Center. And we have programs focusing on some of the specific disabilities like deaf blindness, or on specific age groups like the North Carolina Infant Toddler Program. We have things that kind of work behind the scenes, which is what the State Improvement Project is doing, supporting educators. We have our LENS program focusing on kind of the intersection between race, ethnicity, and learning differences. Really important work we're doing. And most recently, if you haven't heard about us in a while, we have become, for the next 5 years, this whole state's family-to-family health information center. So that's really important because healthcare for our kids is complicated. If you have questions about Medicaid, or you have questions about accessing healthcare or paying for healthcare, things like that, we are now the agency to help with all those sorts of things. It's an official role we have in the state for the next 5 years. So it occurs to me that I'm so busy blabbering that I didn't introduce myself, but Karen Laughlin, I've been a parent educator at the ECAC long enough to know better than to introduce myself. It's been almost 10 years. My daughter that got me started with this work is 25 now, and she continues to struggle because some disabilities stay, but she's doing well in a lot of areas, and we're just looking for that growth. So Anastasia, you want to say just a word or two about yourself?
Sure. My name is Anastasia, and I have a special needs little boy, and I have been a parent educator for maybe about 6 weeks, and I'm still learning a lot. Yeah. And we're glad that you guys are here.
Sure are. Okay. Let's go ahead to the next slide. All right. And as we get going again, I appreciate that input as we got settled in the room. As we get started, would like to know just a couple words. What do you hope to get from the webinar tonight? What drew you to it? And how will we know if you got what you came for? Just a couple of words related to choosing to be here tonight to learn about effective IEPs. Okay, somebody said 504. I want to share that this is largely going to be about IEPs. If you want to try it a while and see, some of the advocacy sorts of strategies would still apply, but we are going to talk specifically about IEPs most of the time tonight. So if you want to drop off, we understand. If you want to call us on that topic, or wait for another webinar where we address that more, that would be another recommendation. Okay, so Anastasia, what kind of things are we seeing? We've got
Lots of fine-tuning goals,
goals.
learning how to know if the goals are being met.
Okay, okay.
We do, Mr. Collins, have a 504 webinar coming up. If you stay tuned to our events page, we'll post that at the end.
Okay, Anastasia, since we're recording, let's not please use names, okay? Okay, so that's really helpful to see. And guess what? I think it lines up pretty well with our objectives for most of you, and this is why we talk about our objectives right at the beginning, so that if this isn't the place for you, if this is not the night for you, we don't want to use your time in a way that you didn't mean for us to. So let's take a look at our learning objectives. And I'm going to turn my camera off for a little while, just so I can pay extra attention to my notes for myself here. All right, so here's what we're thinking to cover. Here's what we plan to do tonight. We're going to look at 2 ways that parents can participate in IEP development. We're actually looking at more than 2 ways. Our goal is that by the end of this, you'll be able to identify 2 ways that are important to you. We're going to ask you if you can identify some questions to ask about present levels, and we're going to describe those in great detail. And we will talk about something that I think is going to meet a lot of your needs. Do we know if an annual IEP goal is SMART? And that's not just an adjective, that's an acronym. So we're going to look at SMART and how those apply to IEP goals. So if this is what you're here to do, you're at the right place. And let's go ahead and continue. Next slide, please. Just going to start with some terms. We'll make sure we all are kind of got the same background. Just going to cover this part quickly so we can spend more time on the kind of the deeper dive. What is an IEP and where do they come from? We're going to cover a lot more terms of that as we go, but this is where we're going to start. Next, please. So an individualized education program is what an IEP stands for. It is the paperwork, as the slide indicates, it's a written plan, but it is importantly, it is the program. So it talks about the details around your child's education, what that will look like. And so sometimes meetings can feel a little bit like they're all about the paperwork, but really we want to think beyond that to what the school days will look like, what the services and the supports will look like. And that's what we're going to do in more detail tonight. We're going to look at, where do they come from, or what they do first, excuse me. Next slide. IEPs do these things. They describe the unique needs of a student with a disability, and unique needs is kind of got air quotes around it. It's a phrase from special ed law that we'll show you in a minute. The parts of the IEP that do this are the student profile, and especially these present levels of academic and functional performance, which I will define in more detail when we get there. It also talks about how those needs will be met, how they will be addressed. That's where the goals, these special education related services, aids and services, all those things come in. And again, lots of vocabulary with IEPs. If you hadn't already experienced that fact, it's very much a part of a special education world. And we'll be kind of making those terms a little more clear as we go. Want you to get familiar with them because they are going to come up a lot. Okay, where do IEPs come from? Next slide. They come from a federal law. So that's a law that applies to every state and equally. It's called IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act. They changed it and did not put the I for improvement in there. So the stated purpose is pretty clear: to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free and appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services, again with the vocabulary. Here's where the unique needs comes in. So designed to meet their unique needs. And very importantly, the goal is to prepare each child with a disability for their future, whether that's education, work, both, and the level of independence that they can attain. So that's pretty important, that there's a federal law that really breaks out the details. North Carolina, as every state, is required to write their own law and then to detail out policies on how that law will be put into place. So you can see here with the principles of IDEA that an IEP, providing an IEP is one of the key principles. And that parent participation along with students is also a key principle of IDEA. We're going to look at the bulk of these principles will be kind of woven through our presentation tonight. Next, please. All right, so our goal here tonight is to talk about effective IEPs. Effective IEPs provide the free and appropriate public education. And how do we determine that? It's a very individualized thing. What's appropriate for one child is not the same as for another. But we're looking for each child with a disability to be able to do these things here, to what they call access the general education curriculum. Every child with a disability is a general education student and member of their school community first and foremost. And so everything that goes on should be grounded in the experiences that other children are having, and then adapted to our child with a disability. So we want them to be learning what other kids are learning, to participate in school activities. We also want for them to be making progress towards their specific IEP goals, and to be learning and participating with what you could call, who you could call the non-disabled peers, so the children without disabilities, as much as is appropriate, again, so that this kind of all loops around. It's appropriate if all these things can happen, and it kind of makes a circle in some ways. That makes any sense. Okay, so that's one of the ways we can know if the IEP is effective. They're written by a team. Some of you are newer, so you'll get familiar with who's on the IEP team. A parent is a required member. The school has certain obligations to try to include parents and notify them of meetings and writing things like this. We have a list here of other required members, and then there's a lot of optional people. Go ahead, please. I want to just say for a minute how IEP teams make decisions, because it is important. It's kind of like a team sport, but the goal is to reach consensus so that people can all live with the decisions. It is not necessarily always possible for everybody to be really happy with every decision, but ideally, the decisions are kind of like we could all live with them. When IEP teams, if they do get stuck and everybody can't agree on something they could all live with, then the person that you saw a mention of a LEA representative, that person is often an administrator, often a principal or assistant principal. That is the only person on an IEP team that can make a decision on their own. They're not, to do that all the time, but they can do it if a team gets stuck. And we bring this up so that as a parent, that you are absolutely a member of the IEP team, but things may not always go your way, and use your time accordingly with your priorities, and just kind of plant in the back of your mind that this is how things work. Okay, next, please. All right, so how can parent participation lead to an effective IEP? That's what we're going to cover this little chunk here. And we can have the next slide. Here's what IDEA says, that almost 30 years of research and experience has demonstrated that the education of children with disabilities can be made more effective by strengthening the role and responsibility of parents. So research does absolutely back that up, and increase communication between parents and schools, and good, strong parent participation in meetings will increase the odds that a child is receiving the free and appropriate public education that they are entitled to. So it's really important. An effective IEP is about a whole child. And who knows a whole child better than a parent? So parents have the ability to make sure that the IEP reflects their child's strengths, needs, personality, history, culture, family priorities. So it's that is part of how IEPs can be effective, when the parents are participating, sharing what they know. It's a really big thing we talk about at ECAC, and we have tools and examples on our website of how you can do that, one of which we will include when we send out an email. Anastasia, if you don't mind making a note to send out the link to Painting the Big Picture, and we'll get that out. So again, the key to success is meeting individual needs. We talked about a child's unique needs. That can be a very broad view of the needs, and parents know a lot about their school need, their children's needs. They've seen their children, grow and develop, and they've seen them get stuck, and so they can absolutely contribute, and that will make a difference. Another key value for ECAC. We just really believe this stuff. Okay, next, please. As you prepare to participate and make your child's IEP as effective as it can be, you can think about these steps. Think about these points. What are the issues? What are you seeing? What do you want for your child? These things all matter. And what might help your child be successful? Parents know a lot about what works with their kids. And sometimes something that works at home might become a strategy at school. It could become an accommodation on an IEP, or just, kind of something that a teacher can plant in the back of their head when they're trying to work with your child. So really does matter for parents to be well prepared and to contribute their thoughts and ideas.
Hey, Karen, we
Yeah.
have a question about if school administrators can make unilateral decisions and overrule everything that parents say. How does that make parents an equal team member?
Right. It's a really good question, and it's really complicated. The reason I want to point it out is that word equal. It really is. It's complicated. I'm stumbling because it's complicated. And ideally, the LEA representative is not looking to do that. They're not looking to make every decision. They are looking to consider parent input and input from all the other team members, and then kind of reserve that right, that legal right to make the decisions for really once in a while. If you as a parent are experiencing that's going on a lot, I would love for you to give us a call, and we can kind of talk through what's happening. All right. I didn't want people to learn that was true in a meeting. So we wanted to introduce that. And there are a lot of strategies to make that happen less. And there we have other webinars about communication, about navigating conflict and things. So if anybody's experiencing that, we can definitely help you deal with that. All right. So the other role, besides sharing what you know and what your priorities are and what you want for your child, is to make sure along the way you're asking good questions. We're going to show specific questions that apply to each part of the IEP we're covering. But on the whole, you ask questions to learn more because the details really matter. Decision-making based on data is really what matters, what should be going on in meetings. So learning to ask questions about data is important. Learning to broaden up the range of options to you know, what else might work, what else could we try, questions like that, really important. And then especially if you're newer at special education, I've already said there's a lot of words that might fly around that are new for you, or that are complicated, or even what my thing is, a lot of words that we use in our daily lives are used in some different ways in IEP meetings. And that can get confusing. So you want to always be sure that you're clarifying what you're hearing. Don't be shy or embarrassed to do that. That is an advocacy skill. And some of the communication strategies that work in other relationships, you know, are you saying what I think you're saying? Did I just hear you say that? Just clarifying and confirming what you're hearing are really important. So that's just some background on how the parent involvement can look in IEP meetings. As I said, we're going to talk about questions and where parent input matters as we shift gears now to look at 3 different key parts of the IEP. Well, there's at least 3. So we're going to start with the student profile. That's page 1 on any IEP. Here's what it looks like. Looks familiar, I hope. Well, some of you said you're new, so maybe not. So this is what they look like. You see the little logo in the upper corner. That's the name of the data system the state uses. We have identifying information, and then we have 3 really important areas, all of which can have parent input or are specifically for parent input. So we've already said that parents know a lot about their kids' strengths, things that they've seen in the home for years. Those can go in there along with teacher observations and things from reports and such. Second one, it's strictly for parents. Parent concerns. I like to disregard the if any, because I think all parents have concerns. It doesn't mean you're complaining. It means you're thinking about things. And it just, here's what's on my mind is kind of what we like to think of that as, you know, related to their education. And then again, this box 3 starts with the word parent, parent and the student. What's the vision for the future? We can tie this question back to that definition, or the purpose, of IDEA, which was to prepare each child with a disability for their individual future. So these things really matter. I'm going to show you some examples of the level of detail that these can include. And as you have time, you can look at your child's IEP and see how it looks compared to these examples. These come in, these specific examples I'm using tonight come from a sample IEP that our Department of Public Instruction's Exceptional Children Division, I'm going to refer now on as DPI, developed back when that ECATS data system was new. So these are on their website, and the sample IEP is you know, the whole IEP. There's examples. So we're going to use a lot of those tonight. So these are the sorts of strengths that we have about a made-up little boy named Henry. And some of these could have come from the parents, right? Some of them could come from other sources. We're going to switch real quick to parent concerns. These are the sorts of concerns. I like you to see these examples. It's not a complaint, right? It's what do I want to see happening? What's on my mind as a parent? What are my goals to some extent, you know, for my child? For example, they want him to see performing at grade level. They believe that's possible. And take a look at yours, you know, when you can, and see if they reflect what's on your mind well. Let's switch to parent vision for the future. That's the next slide. Looks like, are we stuck? There we go. So here's a very, kind of long range goal: graduating with the peers on time, pursuing post-secondary education. I love the second point, that since Henry loves science and checks out science books, they are thinking he might have a future in science. And so as Henry gets older, he's an elementary student on this model IEP, but as he gets older, we would want to see this. If he sticks with the interest in science, we would want to see, well, how can his education lead him towards that? And how do we maximize his interest in science to get him really involved and engaged in his education? All right, so that's the student profile. It kind of sets up some other parts of the IEP, because if a parent concern is listed, it ought to be addressed at some point. It's not just there on the paper, right? Remember, the paper is important, but we're looking for things on this front page of the IEP to influence other parts of the IEP and to be addressed. So I told you we'd talk about some of these words and terms. So let's start with present levels of academic and functional performance. Present level basically means, what can the child do now in this area? Academic areas, I think, are a little more self-explanatory, but they can be, things like math and reading. They can be the sub skills of or the kind of break down the skills. For example, if we're talking about reading, are we talking about fluency? Are we talking about comprehension? It can be a smaller subset of skills. The functional performance is what's a little bit harder. It's kind of like all the other stuff, to put it really simply. It could be many of the things that are mentioned here. Behavior, self-monitoring, being able to stay calm and focused. It could be self-care, hygiene, using the bathroom independently, eating in the cafeteria well. It could be vocational skills and pursuing person skills, people skills that will help in a work setting, and that getting along with kids well enough to be in a classroom and to be in groups in their future. So lots and lots of things can be considered functional. And again, parents, have input into which areas get considered. Present levels, as our slide indicates, report on areas where current assessment data is available. If you are new to the process, they're gonna evaluate all the areas where anybody has concerns. As a child continues, they're gonna evaluate largely the areas they work on, and people, educators and parents can bring up new areas. So that's why it's important to keep these things current and updated. So you're going to see on the forms, the area, it should be described, and then all the information should be about that area. You don't want to mix and match too much, or it gets confusing. Really important to point out, the source of the data will be listed here. And it might say teacher observations, or it might say iReady assessments or something. Some districts, some IEPs will have lots and lots and lots of actual data running through this middle column, sometimes for pages. Other districts are kind of strictly listing the sources. So a lot of districts are doing something in between, but there should be a certain amount of attention paid here to the data. And look what it says, why I put the blue arrow there. Scores should either be self-explanatory or they should be explained. What good is a bunch of data if we as parents and many educators don't know how to read it, or what it means, or what I like to think of as, like, compared to what? Can we have data in some sort of format that parents can relate to really well? So that's, again, these forms, this is from Department of Public Instruction. This is their instructions to IEP teams here. Make the data understandable, and parents, please ask, please, like I said before, Don't be shy. Don't be embarrassed. This is an advocacy skill. This is something you do for your kids, is ask what that data means. And again, you know, sometimes when folks send us IEPs and ask us to review them, I've noticed there'll be some current stuff, and there might be some things that are old. There might be some things that got copy and pasted. I don't think it's anybody's fault. I think it's the system, and they're working on that. So as a parent, what you know, I would do is go through and highlight maybe relevant dates, the most current information. And if you see a bunch of repetitive stuff that's an accident, I just cross it out. So if you have questions about how to read these, you can always call us about that. We'd love to help you with that. Another thing that goes on here is really important is this, if you look all the way to the right, the question is this area in need of specially designed instruction? That's not always an easy yes, no. So there may be discussion here, or it may be that the data is indicating such a big gap between your child's performance and the grade level standards, or other sorts of expectations, that it's an easy yes. It may be that they're doing so great, it's an easy no. But there should be discussion, and these are the areas that will lead to goals, which will lead to special education services. So it's really important that you are engaged in that discussion and helping to make that decision. All right, so then the last thing is on that we see here is the narrative summary. So that was in the box, and this is where the description of the words is. If you are not so much a numbers person or a data sort of person, this may be more helpful to you, where they kind of describe it in words, break it down a little bit. This is what we call our baseline data. What is our kid able to do right now? So here we've got some examples with Henry, what he can do, how well he could do it. And I want to point you towards the middle bullet. I think this is a really helpful one, because it says that there's a second grade skill he's not doing. And so I believe that if he's a second grader, this is our compared to what point, right? He's doing these things in the first bullet, but the expectation is for him to be able to do the thing in the middle, and he's not there yet. Okay. And a present levels ideally indicates the strengths in the area, which clearly here is math, and give us kind of just that baseline. It's kind of like, where are we, so that we know how to get where we want to go. We got to know where we're starting from. All right. Questions about present levels often have to do with what did that data mean, right? So typically, those are the sorts of questions you're going to want to ask. Just be sure that it makes sense. I want to throw out a quick tip, which is, if you are sitting here thinking, well, how would I understand that if I'm just first seeing it in an IEP meeting? That's a really good, valid question. We strongly recommend that you ask to see data a couple of days before a meeting. Ideally, it's ready, because there's a lot of input onto the forms through the data system that your educators are doing. And that way you can sit and look at it at home. You can ask a more experienced friend. You can call us, so that you're not just hearing about data for the first time and trying to process it in a room full of people or on a Zoom screen. So that's going to help a lot with that. Do we have questions where we need to pause here, Anastasia, about present levels, or are we good to move on to goals?
One of the questions I've seen a couple of times is, will you be sending out the recording or a copy of the presentation? Because there are a couple of people that need to go.
Okay. Yeah, we definitely send a copy, and the recording takes a little bit of time, but it should also come out. So yes and yes.
And then there's a question about the relevant data. And she was saying that it's her understanding that they check mark the one in the assessment summary, and that's what shows up.
I don't think I understand. Assessment summary. The source of data is going to be, could be a wide range of things. And again, we're looking at, are we talking about academic skills? Are we talking about more functional things? Academic skills, can be assessed through classroom measures, through standardized tests, all kinds of things. Other things are going to largely be observation. I don't know if that helps, but if you want to flesh out your question, we'll see if we have time to get to that again a little bit later. I do want to go then to goals. So present levels lead to goals if the box was checked. Yes, right? So we get goals for every area where the present level discussion of the present level said, yes, we need specially designed instruction for this goal. And I'm going to define specially designed instruction just a little bit later on. Okay, so we're looking at goals. IEPs are typically written to cover a 12-month period. Not always, but typically. And so an annual, that's why they call it an annual goal. What can the child reasonably be expected to accomplish with within a 12-month period, not, on their own by any means, but with effective instruction. So that's just a quick definition, but we're going to go deep into goals and all the components and that whole SMART acronym. But we want to think about, so we identified the area that needs a goal based on the present data and the present levels, but there's lots and lots of goals to choose from, right? So how do we think as parents about what's most important? And I know educators, of course, have to think about this too. But as a parent, you want to think about your concerns, your parent concerns again. Think about where your child's life might be heading. Think about the things we have listed here. How can the child be successful in the general education curriculum to the greatest extent possible for the given child? So one of the reasons we say this is IEP goals are not simply to state the grade level standard. They are more to identify that gap between where your child is and what the expectation is. So that's kind of one of, sometimes you're looking underneath the skills even. So think about that, and you can ask questions again about what makes this the right goal. We'll have that later as well. Some children are spending a greater amount of time away from kids without disabilities than others. And we're going to talk about that in a little more detail. But if you are looking for your child to be in a general setting more often, what skills would they need for that? Is it academic skills they would need? Is it personal skills, social skills, self-management? What skills would they need to get in, to be successful in a more general setting more of the day? As your child gets older, or as they're making what is referred to as transitions from, for example, elementary to middle, or middle into high school, or the biggest transition of all, which is out of high school, what are they going to need to be successful in those environments? If you're writing an IEP for 12 months, and you know that in the middle of that 12 months, your child's going to go to middle school, then you want to be asking and thinking about the differences. And we do webinars, and we have some great content about transitions and how to think those through. So if you're interested in that, keep alert for webinars that we do, or give us a call. And then you want to think about the whole day, and extracurriculars, cafeteria, special classes, art, music, field trips, all of it. Just don't forget about the whole day. School's a lot more than just academics, and kids' needs are different in different settings. So this is complicated stuff. What should the goals be written in? It's important because goals will guide instruction to an extent. And progress on goals is talked about, is the basis for a lot of important decisions. So that's why we're going to go, kind of deep in goals. And let's go ahead and shift to our next slide, which is our SMART acronym. I'm going to spend a little time here, and then we are going to weave these things throughout. So don't worry if you don't have to get everything about them right here. But if you are taking notes, you might want to take a couple notes on SMART goals. I saw a question flash up real quick about a number of goals, and there is no set number. This is a great question to ask your educators on the IEP team, but it is going to be individualized. I've 5-ish maybe. I've heard as a generalization, but it's individualized. All right, so the thing that makes goals SMART, the first thing is, are they specific? Are they clear enough? Do they contain enough detailed information? Are they understandable? And we're going to look at some example goals, and we're going to talk about some kind of non-examples to kind of flesh this out. The thing about goals is they need to be readable so that a wide range of people that look at them all understand them, so that these important conversations about whether goals are met can actually happen. And so just make sure the language is clear, that it makes sense, that the goals aren't accidentally lumping a few skills together. They're typically going to be about a particular skill. And this is what makes them measurable. They describe a behavior that can be observed, that can be seen or heard or measured in some way. And we will, again, we are going to keep covering this, so don't worry about it too hard right here. They should be achievable, they should be ambitious, but also realistic. And that can be a bit of a conversation sometimes about how do we hold a high bar without being unreasonable, given how many hours in a day, given the child's present levels, given all kinds of considerations. I think one of the things where parent input matters a lot is, are they relevant? Are they addressing the needs that seem to really matter right now, and towards the future? I'm going to give just one quick example involving older kids who are getting ready, to graduate, and who are having math goals related to. I just bring this up because it happened a couple times in the same week. The math goals were written to address counting change, being able to make change, and counting money, things like this. And when we talk with the parents realize that their children never carry money. They use debit cards, and that knowing how to use the debit card and knowing how to understand things about their balance is the relevant goal. And so they went to IEP meetings and asked for that shift. So relevance is sometimes, as I've said, a key area where families can provide input. Also teachable. It has to be something teachable. For example, we can't teach kids not to have a disability. We can teach them how to adapt to it, how to have skills to work around it, to work with their strengths. And we can't necessarily teach things like a good attitude. So we'll talk again about when we talk about measurable goals, we'll talk more about things that mostly really happen in kids' heads. So we're looking for behaviors we can observe. Sometimes things like attitude might be able to be translated into some specific behaviors, and that's what we would be looking for. All right, so let's break the components of the goals down, and these concepts you'll hear about them throughout this discussion.
Hey, Karen, before we move
Yeah.
on, we have a really good question of
Okay.
what if the present level and the goals do not match?
Yeah, they need to match. They need to match. So that would be, I think, something to go back to the IEP team about and say that you're concerned about that. Yeah, that they need to match. Otherwise, what are we talking about, right? We want to make decisions about services or about changing goals. It would be hard to have a well-informed conversation if those don't match up. All right, so what makes up goals? We got 3 parts. We're going to cover each of them separately. And so this is just an introductory thing. We can go to the next one. So the first part is, what will the child do? And again, it should be a behavior so that it can be observed and measured. It should involve a skill that can be taught. That's the teachable part we mentioned. And it should be, and we talked about the specific description of a skill that is visible, you know. Again, we don't want to do these things like a child will respect personal space, for example. What will it look like when they do respect the personal space? We want to identify the behavior as opposed to the inner thing, right? I have to tell this story still, even though my daughter's 25, about the time that the proposed goal was that she develop a better attitude towards learning. She absolutely needed a better attitude towards learning, but the question became, how do we measure that? You know, what would that look like? We can't be inside her head. If we could change around her attitudes, we'd do it, right? But we can't. So how would we recognize it? Or what skills does she need, you know, to get to the behaviors that would show the better attitude? That would be the really important discussion. Okay, so you want to look at those goals and see if it's describing a behavior. There's going to be probably a phrase that starts with given no more than 2 prompts, or given use of a calculator, because again, these goals do not get met in a vacuum. There's teaching and support involved. And so this gives the conditions. And this is going to, I think you'll very commonly see that for exact phrase, given something, 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 student will do this behavior. And we'll show some examples of that. So there's just a little bit of background there. You know, IEPs don't detail a lot about how the instruction, but there are some hints here. All right, next, please. So then what is our goal for how well or how often, how accurately, what the child will perform the skill to meet the goal? You'll see a lot of these sorts of things now, you know, 3 out of 5, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, as it shares here. We have, you know, things like fluency, reading fluency, you know, how many words per minute, over what time period, all these kind of things. And again, these are the things you can ask questions about. Well, if we're looking for 9 out of 10 trials, how often will those trials be? You know, things like this is certainly not going to all be in the same day. Over what period of time are we looking? And so again, the details matter. And so be sure that this is understandable. And then I've got some questions coming up here about goals in general. I think that's next. We'll get to that. Okay, sorry, ways to measure, go ahead, Anastasia, back to the ways to measure progress. There are lots of ways and they will be indicated. And we'll show you in a minute exactly how that lays out on the IEP form. But there are lots of ways. And again, you can feel free to ask questions, take your own notes in a meeting about what you hear, because what's going to be on the goals can probably be pretty brief. But it's important to understand this so that if you as a parent want to check in or you're receiving progress reports, you know where this data and information is coming from. All right, wide range here. Here's how it lays out on the IEP form. Your area of need is in the middle. Reading, for example, here. So make sure that the goal really is a reading goal. Sometimes, you'd be surprised with the data system, little things happen and things end up in the wrong place. So we have an observable skill, which is, and here's the given. This is really important. Given a reading passage at his instructional level, which would be indicated in the present level, right? What his current Henry's reading instructional level is. So it might say, the other thing it could say would be grade level, but that's not what we've got going on here for Henry. We're looking at his reading at his instructional level, and he's going to accomplish within a year, he will be able to read 105 words or more per minute. And that's measurable, right? Because you got a watch and a timer and you can count the words. And he will do it 4 out of 5 trials with 100% accuracy. So that's the expectation. And so the 100 pops into this box. That's the criteria for mastery. And here's how they'll measure the progress: running records. If you don't know exactly what that is, it's a great question. Data sheets, who's keeping those? What is an anecdotal record? I don't know for sure. So that's important. And then we've got another couple of examples. And you see, we don't have the given on the second example, but the third one says, given a writing prompt, Henry will use writing strategies that he's been taught. So, the strategies are mentioned there. He will write a rough draft. It'll be at least 3 paragraphs. And it contains a lot of information here about the sentence, the 3 details, and a closing sentence. So the more detail, the more we know if we're on track and if we're talking about the same thing when we get together to see if he's met this goal. So lots of examples. And if you look at goals at home on the IEP and you're not sure, you'll have this presentation, you'll have this printed. I got to say right now, the printing did not go well with this, but I'll fix that by the time we send it to you. And you'll have this available and you can take a look at it and kind of see if you want to contact anybody about your child's goals. I want to point out another thing too, that for each goal, every team is to talk about, do we need assistive technology to meet this goal? Let's go ahead to our next slide about what assistive technology might look like. There's another time to talk about assistive technology, but it can be discussed and the box, checked yes or no with each goal. And then the assistive technology decision would be documented someplace else, which we'll show you. If you're new to all this, or if you haven't thought about assistive technology in a while, it's important to remember that it is not all really technology. I think the phrase was probably used before we use technology the way we do now. My daughter, her first assistive technology was a pencil grip and graph paper. It helped her get her numbers lined up and get her hand on her pencil so she could write a little more neatly. There are all kind of how is a beanbag? It's not all technology, right? It's equipment, it's a device, it's stuff of almost any sort. And so that's why I'm saying some words in special ed don't mean what we use them to mean all the time. And I think that's why the term assistive technology is just a little bit confusing. And you know, all sorts of devices could be considered assistive technology, and we'll show you in a few minutes where that gets documented. There is of course, a lot of really high tech stuff available, and for communication and for all sorts of things. So don't forget about that, but recognize that the term also refers to a lot of these sort of just physical objects. Okay, thank you. We'll go up to different last point about goals. Some students on what they call the extended content standards, objectives and milestones. So we're breaking down steps toward goals into either smaller steps or smaller chunks of time. That's sometimes required. It can be optional for all children. And I know there's a lot there, but I think we unfortunately need to move off that topic. If you have questions, if your child's IEP does contain benchmarks and objectives, please reach out to us about that. I want to spend a minute on the questions. I think this summarizes a lot of the things we've already covered. Again, you will have this list of questions. There are many other good questions, but these are some pretty good ones. I want to go to the fourth question, which says, what will instruction look like? As I shared, there's very little documentation about instruction on an IEP. It is not required, and there's really not even a place for it. But that does not mean that as a parent, you can't ask questions and take notes and know more. And you know, many of us want to be able to picture what's going on, and that's reasonable. So that can be you know, what kind of instruction will support this goal is a really good question. And then in terms of progress, how can we receive information about progress? How much communication do you feel you need to be able to keep a close eye on progress? And there are some standard ways that that's handled, but it can also be personalized more if the team agrees that that would be a benefit. So you'll have this list, and I'm sure many of you have asked good questions in meetings. If you want to throw a good question you've asked in the chat, that would certainly help some of our newer people. All right, so we've talked about baseline, where is our child? We talked about the goals, where do we want to get? And now we're talking about how do we get there? What supports and services does the child need? This discussion of supports and services is all kind of grounded in a really important concept and requirement from special education law referred to as the least restrictive environment, which now this is a very small version of the definition that says to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities are spending their time with children who are not disabled. The appropriate part, again, goes back to our discussion of FAPE, free and appropriate public education. So it kind of all comes back around and connects together. Your child is progressing, they're meeting their IEP goals, things like that that we mentioned earlier. So it's not always the maximum extent possible. It's that appropriate that makes, you know, these decisions kind of challenging. But that's the concept, and we're going to look at all these decisions about services supports with that concept kind of grounding us. Next slide, please. And you can see that this section on the ECATS forms is headed least restrictive environment. And it considers all these things which we're going to talk about now. What is the specially designed instruction going to look like? And where will it be provided? How often? Down to the amounts of minutes. How much and how often? And where? Again, speaks to least restrictive environment. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. So specially designed instruction is basically what's provided by a special education teacher. It's going to either be instruction that's provided in a different way from what a typical child at the grade level would receive, or on different content. Again, like just an example of different content would be, let's say we have many kids working on self-management and calming strategies. That's not necessarily taught directly to all children, but it might be being taught directly to our student with a disability. So, and again, that, teaching strategies that special education teachers are experts in, are not necessarily provided to all children. So that's the basic, very basic definition of specially designed instruction. And we saw on the form before the frequency, how many minutes, how often, how long, and where. And you'll hear possibly discussion about, are we going to push in or pull out the services? So pushing in would mean special educator coming into a more general setting, or maybe co-teaching with the general education teacher. That would be sort of a pushing in, kind of part of an inclusion approach. Some kids will need to be taken out of their more general setting, or spending perhaps the bulk of their day in a special education setting. This is what gets talked about here. This is important stuff, and we will have a slide with some questions about this as well. And then the second chunk of boxes on that form was to consider related services. These are the specialized services that a child would need to support their special education so that they can benefit from it. This is not an exhaustive list, by the way. This is some of them. And I wanted to point out, that transportation, specialized transportation can be provided. All of these things are considered with the concept of the least restrictive environment running through everybody's minds. And again, can the services be brought to the child in a more general setting or not? So all that is up for discussion. And again, times and numbers of minutes, and there has been a recent change in the data system to take away the phrase that the certain amount of times per reporting period, because that was getting too hard to understand and provide correctly. So you should see it indicated weekly, monthly, something like that. So questions to consider. What about the pushing in and the pulling out? Can my child receive special education in a general education classroom? That's a conversation about least restrictive environment. That's important to have. It can be complicated. If my child is pulled out, what will they be missing, and what do we do about that? Can they be scheduled to miss the less serious academic areas? How does that work? That's a good thing for a parent to be able to visualize, to leave an IEP meeting with a sense of the daily schedule. And again, the question, what does that specially designed instruction look like? Get a description. We are not all special educators and don't always understand how that works, and it's important too. And then if your child is going into a group setting for special education, how will it be individualized? Because we're always keeping track of that phrase, the unique needs of each child. So those are some solid questions. If other parents that are with us here have other questions that have gotten you good answers, or that you think were really important, please do share. We'll learn from each other here that way. And I am watching our time closely. We're down to 10 minutes, which we're not doing bad. We're going to shift to another really important part of children being able to spend their day in a more general education setting. We're going to show you a video about that. And I think you really enjoy it. Can it go to full screen, Anastasia? Not really. Okay. Thank you.
Um,
Is it just stopping?
yeah, it's just stopping. So I'm just going to open it.
Okay. Meaning we're going to use it or we're not going to use it?
I'm going to try to open it. It
Okay.
doesn't want to, it doesn't want to cooperate.
Got it. Okay.
For students with disabilities, the right accommodations and modifications can be as important to school success as appropriate IEP goals. These educational supports are similar, but they are not the same. Accommodations change how a student accesses information, participates in school activities, or demonstrates their learning. They do not change the curriculum. Modifications, however, change what is being taught or what a student is expected to learn and demonstrate.
I only need you to do the circled problems for me.
Accommodations can be made by adjusting the amount of work a student must complete, allowing extra time,
Just go ahead and turn your paper in. Okay, you can go ahead and keep working. You've got about 5 more minutes.
adapting assignments,
Alex, I have your shapes here. Good.
providing extra assistance, or changing the physical setting.
Let's do one more page today.
There is no one set list. Because each child is unique, the IEP team must identify specific strategies to help your child succeed. For example, presenting a few math problems at a time may help a student who is easily overwhelmed. Another student might benefit from short breaks, or being allowed to finish an assignment at home. A student who has difficulty writing may be allowed the use of a computer, while students with a print disability may benefit from having tests read aloud.
They went downtown.
A child can be given an appropriate role when working in small groups,
Where am I?
or be allowed to participate in an activity in a different way.
Beware of what? Excuse me.
Being seated near the teacher helps some students stay focused,
So we'll go ahead and discuss these in a minute.
and assistive technology can support a wide range of needs.
And if you need me, you can raise your hand and I'll come and help you. All right?
In addition to accommodations, it is sometimes necessary to modify the curriculum. For example, when the class is learning how to tell time, one child might be expected to identify only the hours. While the class is working on vocabulary and spelling, another child may work from a shorter list, or focus exclusively on the meaning of key words.
Insects with 8 legs.
Parents play a vital role in crafting the IEP. After all, no one knows your child better. So at home, watch for what works and any struggles that continue. Talk to your child about what feels right to him or to her. Make sure the IEP team considers your child's needs throughout the entire school day, including classroom time, non-academic and extracurricular activities, and transportation. You are not expected to have all the answers. Other members of the IEP team will have much to contribute. You can help by making sure that all accommodations and modifications are clearly written into the IEP. Be sure to ask whether any of the modifications will impact your child's graduation. Ask questions, offer ideas, and bring up any concerns you may have. Open dialogue and clear documentation are essential to developing a high-quality IEP.
When he gets to middle school.
I didn't know it was this far from the lockers to the buses.
During the IEP meeting, we can talk about adding extra time to Sam's schedule.
Oh, okay, great.
So we've talked about quite a few modifications today.
Hemos hablado acerca de muchas modificaciones.
¿Hay un límite?
She wants to know if there is a limit.
No, however, we do want to be careful if we create too many modifications, she may not be able to meet the high school graduation requirements.
Well, I know Tori likes being around other people, but she also has a hard time with conversation. So I was wondering, did you have, any other ideas that might help her with that?
Well, we could try a peer buddy, or we could work in small groups more often.
These are great goals, but Brooke's in the 6th grade and is only reading at a 2nd grade level.
This is true, but audiobooks should help her access to content better, and I think we might be able to find some textbooks that are at a lower reading level.
Tori always turns in her homework, but it's not always what was assigned.
Maybe if you can help her get started in class, she'll know she's on the right track.
Sure, I could do that.
I'm unclear who will follow up with each of these items.
I'll handle supports during basic instruction.
And I'll arrange for the seatbelt and keyboard.
Accommodations and modifications should change as your child's needs change.
All right, time for comprehension. If comprehension, then iPad. Are you ready?
You are not limited to a standard list.
Can we play?
So be creative and stay involved.
Can we go to the park?
I would love to go to the park, but you're going to study first, right?
Your child is counting on you.
Thanks for helping each other out. That'll be great.
All right, we need to wrap up, and we were really, really close anyway, so I want to let you know that you will receive this, and these points are really largely about watching the details. The best example in the universe, I think, for accommodations is, how small is a small group setting, right? Is it 4? Is it 6? Is it 10? How does that look exactly? So think about that as the video indicates. Parent input is important. Let's go ahead and just wrap up real quick. I'm going to skip that. I do want to point out, do want to just show the teacher training can be included if you have questions about that. It's really been important since COVID with so much turnover and new folks. Teacher training has been a great suggestion for many families we've talked with. And this is just, the last slide's just a summary. So what I'd like to do now, Anastasia, before people have to head out, is put up our poll. And we would like to ask you for your input, because we have to tell our funders how we're doing. We also always want to improve. So please go ahead and answer this as you need to leave the Zoom room. And please know that we have many more webinars coming. I think we're going to schedule one based around that accommodations video and kind of break it down in more detail. We have a presentation called an IEP road trip that we do fairly often, that it kind of covers every part of the IEP, because tonight we did leave out some parts that apply to certain kids. So we covered a lot tonight, and if you are new and it was like just so much and you want to follow up with us individually, please do. Or if you want to problem solve anything in particular, please do let us know. And I again want to thank you for your time. I want to thank our sponsors one last time, from Chapel Hill Carborough City Schools. And I want to thank also all the parents or loved ones or kids who made it possible for you to spend this time with us in the evening. I know that can be a challenge, and we really do greatly appreciate you being with us. We appreciate all the work and love and sweat that you're putting into your kids. We know it can be hard work, and we just want you to know we're out here for you if you need us. And I think that's about it. It's not too bad but a couple minutes over. I appreciate those that could stay the whole time. We totally understand that some people had to kind of check out early. So thank you again. I hope to see you or see your name on our list sometime soon. All right. I hope. Okay. I think we have people just sort of finishing and getting out. We had
Oh, thank you, everyone.
we had a lot of people like at the peak, you know, and I understand this is hard to spend the whole time. So I think we did, yeah, I hope that was meaningful. Can you turn is the recording off?
I can turn it off.